Welcome. My name is Peter Harrison, and I'm a graduate student in the Masters of Public Relations program at Mount Saint Vincent University in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And this is a presentation of my final research project and a paper that resulted titled To Forgive Divine, Searching for the Origins of Medical Errors. I want to begin this presentation with a question. Can you think of a time when you, a member of your family, or perhaps a friend have been impacted by a medical error? Maybe you were given the wrong medication, or were prescribed too much of a medication, or perhaps it was a missed, obvious diagnosis, even something that may have led to someone's death. Anecdotally, many of us know of a medical error, but Galladay 2012 posits there is an 86% chance that error was never reported. And with that, no other health professionals got the chance to learn from that mistake. Like many of you, I have my own anecdotal evidence of the serious consequences of medical errors. But it was only after researching for a previous article on the subject that I began to realize the scope of the issue of medical errors. I became frustrated that few others know the extent of the problem, that not enough is being done to prevent serious illnesses and deaths that occur as a result of medical errors, and I regret the lack of systems that have been put in place to aid their proper reporting. To be clear, though, there is no hidden agenda against the medical community involved with my research, only a desire to begin to understand the reasons behind a phenomenon that seems to remain cloaked behind our failure to establish a just culture in healthcare facilities. This paper presents a critical discourse analysis informed through the lens of constructivist grounded theory of what Milani 2012 calls the most recognized book in all of medicine, and Chambers 2014 says is a textbook used in medical schools around the world. Edited by Casper, Fauci, Hauser, Longo, Jameson, and Localzo 2015, that book is Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine. The critical discourse analysis is used to answer the following research question. Does Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine place appropriate emphasis on the importance of accurately and responsibly reporting medical errors in healthcare institutions? The following supplementary questions are also answered. Does the teaching material for trainee doctors pertaining to medical errors found in Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine instruct in such a way as to maintain power dynamics in favor of doctors, or does it aim to share power with patients? And finally, what recommendations can be made to improve the discourse in the direction of better learning outcomes? The title of my paper, To Forgive Divine, Searching for the Origins of Medical Errors, is a bit of a play on words. You see, the original publication that got the world talking about medical errors was Cohn, Corrigan, and Donaldson's 2000 study titled To Err is Human, Building a Safer Health System. It leads off my literature review for To Forgive Divine, and it was the first to claim that medical errors in hospitals are responsible for 98,000 deaths each year in the U.S. Later studies, though, would peg that number as extremely conservative. And as Macquarie and Daniel 2016 hypothesized, medical errors are the third leading cause of death in America, claiming more than 250,000 lives annually. Cancer, heart disease, and then medical errors. Suicide, shootings, and car crashes are way behind. A 2004 Canadian study by Baker et al. Finds medical errors happen here at a rate similar to the American rate. That study posits that 7.5% of the hospital admissions in Canada result in adverse events, and further says that 20.8% of the adverse events result in deaths. Now, to put that into perspective, and this is going to sound like fear-mongering, but it's simple math. With approximately 71,000 hospital admissions in Nova Scotia last year, that could equate to 5,300 adverse events and, remarkably, as many as 1,100 deaths by adverse events in Nova Scotia hospitals in 2016 alone. Much of the literature on the subject of medical errors tends to focus on establishing the rates of errors in various countries, like the Baker et al. Study, Blendon et al. 2002, Davis et al. 2003, and Hayward and Hofer 2001. Other studies, like 2010's Chang et al. Article, Evans et al. 2006, Hayes 2010, and Lawton and Parker 2004, all pertain to attitudinal barriers that stand in the way of reporting medical errors and best practices for reducing medical errors, with studies from Leap, Berwick, and Bates 2002, Olson et al. In 2007, and Pape 2003. Thomas 2006 and Waring 2005 reveal an oft-cited reason for failing to report medical errors: the fear of litigation and the bad publicity that could result from a court trial. Doctors often report that mistakes are inevitable and are part of the learning process. Therefore, the reporting of adverse events is not helpful or useful, and adverse events are also considered, quote, an inevitable consequence of working within a complex organization, unquote. That's from Waring, 2005. Now, the literature that contributes to the topic of best practices for reducing medical error includes the introduction of aviation safety standards in healthcare facilities. That's LEAP 2002. Reason, 1997 and 2000, whose work is largely concentrated on high reliability organizations such as airlines, champions the establishment of a just culture in healthcare institutions and for a systematic approach to combating human error, putting systems in place so that mistakes are much less likely to happen. One untapped area in the overall literature is medical textbooks and an examination of them to see if they can offer clues regarding why medical errors continue to occur largely unabated and remain vastly underreported. I chose the textbook, Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine. It was first published in 1950 and has been translated into 14 different languages, and it's used in Canada at Dalhousie, McGill, University of Calgary, and in just about every other medical school you can name, including Harvard, where most of the editors teach. I conducted a critical discourse analysis of the 3 of the 480 chapters in the textbook that dealt in any way with medical errors and patient safety, and I did so through the lens of constructivist grounded theory. I'm going to take just a moment to explain what that means as it pertains to my research. Key to constructivist grounded theory is that the researchers become part of the research endeavor rather than objective observers. Mills, Bonner, and Francis, 2006, posit that it's critically important that the researchers acknowledge their values and that their readers acknowledge the values of the researchers as part of the outcomes. Now, this is in sharp contrast to traditional grounded theory that asks researchers to enter the field of inquiry with as few predetermined thoughts as possible. To ensure reliability for my critical discourse analysis, I used Fairclough's 1995 three-dimensional framework for discourse analysis and conducted 3 interpretations of the text, a macro, a micro, and a meso interpretation. Here's what I found. During the macro interpretation, I went through the text incident by incident to determine dominant themes that led to coding. Memo writing also created an analysis of the external relations in the text, exposing dominant social practices, norms, and structures. The macro level of interpretation of the discourse about medical errors found in Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine found 47 examples of the authors blaming medical errors on systemic issues in healthcare facilities. While the authors are correct, they offer only a handful of examples of how systems could be organized or made better. Practical advice for reducing medical errors are addressed only 8 times. On 16 occasions, the text portrays physicians as powerful, all-knowing, and in the best position to know how to remedy the problems that cause medical errors. The suggestion that the causes of medical errors are just too complex to fix comes up 11 times in the textbook, and examples of the authors blaming others besides doctors for medical errors arise 14 times. Guarded warnings about the possible financial and career costs of reporting medical errors are embedded in the text on 4 occasions. The micro level of interpretation focused on grammar, sensitizing words, organization, leading statements, rhetoric, and linguistic devices, looking for, as Mullet 2018 instructs, indications of what the text hopes to accomplish, representations, and the author's positionalities. Here are a couple of examples of how this type of interpretation works from the textbook. This line: safety theory clearly points out that individuals make errors all the time. Bates, 2015. My micro-level interpretation of this line: the use of the word clearly implies a single truth that lessens the impact of adverse events. After all, individuals make errors all the time. Or this quote from the textbook: it is common to forget to complete an action when one is interrupted partway through it by a page. Bates, 2015. The micro-level of interpretation: using a passive voice has the impact of nominalization, which Fairclough 1992 posits, quote, has the effect of backgrounding the process itself, so that who is doing what to whom is left implicit, unquote. The micro level of interpretation revealed numerous examples of the omission of critical facts and seminal studies about medical errors, which resulted in the textbook diminishing the problem of medical mistakes. There were also several examples of the text implying a single truth, the truth as presented as the hegemonic ideology of physicians and those who instruct them. A meso level of interpretation of the text provided insights into how Harrison's principles of internal medicine is produced and consumed, as well as the power relations assumed by the text. As well, it examined the historical and social context of the text, the intended purpose and audience, and the writer characteristics. To answer my research question, Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine does not place appropriate emphasis on the importance of accurate and responsible reporting of medical errors in healthcare institutions. In fact, it places no emphasis whatsoever on the ethical responsibility that physicians must report mistakes in the interest of preventing future illnesses and deaths. While the textbook does acknowledge reason system theory to explain how medical errors occur, it fails to recognize Reason's 1997 systematic approach to combating human error, one that requires healthcare professionals to report all medical errors with the knowledge that they will not be punished except in the circumstance of gross negligence. The first supplementary question asks if the teaching material for trainee doctors pertaining to medical errors found in Harrison's Principles of Internal Medicine instructs in such a way as to maintain power dynamics in favor of doctors. It does. Or does it aim to share power with patients? It does not. The textbook appears to be locked in an old-school doctor knows best mindset that goes so far as to suggest that doctors know better than their patients, that more benefit would be derived from focusing on the quality of healthcare rather than patient safety. Sharing power with patients assumes that doctors will take it upon themselves to inform patients and colleagues about medical errors, which, as we discover in Frush 2008, Hayes 2010, Johnstone and Kanasaki 2006, and Leap 2002, that simply doesn't happen. They do not inform their patients and colleagues about medical errors in the vast majority of medical mistakes. My first supplementary research question asks what recommendations can be made to improve the discourse in the direction of better learning outcomes. Medical textbooks and the institutions that use them must begin to teach and advocate for the importance of a just culture. Reason, 1997, describes a just culture as, quote, an atmosphere of trust in which those who provide essential safety-related information are encouraged and even rewarded, but in which people are clear about where the line is drawn between acceptable and unacceptable behavior and between blameless and blameworthy actions, unquote. Only when a medical error crosses the line into blameworthy should health professionals ever need to be concerned about things like litigation, such as in the recent case documented by Weeks 2018 in the Toronto Star, the case of two nurses in Sydney, Nova Scotia, who were charged with forging documents in the case of a 79-year-old man who died outside the hospital on a cold night this past February. The nurses are alleged to have forged documents about the status of the patient on the night he died. This may be a case of a system that was in place, but not followed correctly. And Halifax police are currently investigating the death of a 40-year-old spina bifida patient who died in hospital after being transported there 2 months earlier from a long-term care facility. 40-year-old Chrissy Dunnington had badly infected bed sores. A Canadian Press 2018 article tells her family's story of how Chrissy was not moved often enough in her bed, not correctly positioned in her wheelchair, and died from the badly infected pressure sores that resulted. The medical errors that occurred in both of these anecdotes were never reported by the healthcare professionals involved and are only known to us because the victims' families spoke up. As a result, the opportunity to learn from the mistakes was almost missed. But maybe the deaths that resulted from the errors could have been avoided if earlier mistakes had been reported and acted upon, systems put in place, and quite possibly the chain of errors never would have happened in the first place if medical textbooks had taken the position that medical professionals have an ethical duty to report all medical errors and that healthcare facilities are obligated to promote a just culture and act upon errors to put systems in place to reduce the chances of the same medical mistakes from happening over and over again. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to our discussions.